Hello and welcome to part 4 where we surface in the rear. And before we get to that, I think this is a good time to sort of step back and sort of see this model on how it looks finally complete in this stage, right? This is just the first stage. And now that we could kind of look back on it, we could really start to analyze it and compare it to our sketches and then see what went wrong and what went right, and overall if the proportions are good. This is a great time to send this off to Hanbin, and he could do some orthographics on top of that, which he already did. So let me quickly show you guys what he did. So overall, we got really close, right? He really enjoyed these proportions, how thick the body is. The really big change, if you notice, is on the wheels. And all we're really doing is we're not making them bigger or anything. We're just moving them up about 30, 40 millimeters. And obviously for a race car, to have extremely, low ground clearance is super normal. So it's very easy, and it's still very believable if we just move all those wheel wells up, and it really balances out this car a lot better. And then if we look at all these lines, all of these are just like kind of like the cores that I already like set up, and he's just refining the proportions, right? It's a very there's a lot of synergy here going on, right? He had a certain side profile. This is a different one, right? But now it's within a package. He got my CAD, and now we could kind of move forward. And this is a very, very quick and great way to sort of accomplish this, right? And if we look at the front, it's still very good. He wants it a little bit wider, maybe a little more aggressive in the front, the grill a little bit taller, but nothing too crazy. And it's gonna be very easy for me to take my blocked in form and make it into what he wants. So let's remember that this is just the first step. I actually consider this like the first sort of like real anchor, right? In the first video, I was talking about the anchors in a curve, and then later we talked about anchors as a surface, and now when we're talking about the grand scheme of things, this is like the first anchor, right? This is the first like blocked in form that we can use as a base and really start to refine everything, and all of like the relationships between the surface. The proportionally speaking, they're not correct yet, but the relationships between them, like how if we can accomplish them, like it's apparent, it's really easy. We could take this form and maybe mill it out, and maybe a clay sculptor can take it and further refine it. Obviously I'm going to refine it later in a more digital workflow. But actually, I wanted to take this time to, actually show you guys that this is really an extremely valuable skill set to have this blocked in form. Because if I send this to any other modeler, if they receive this and this sketch or the orthos that Hanbin gave me, it's very easy for them to sort of get to the next step. There's a bigger proportion of CAD modelers can do that, but to go from zero to this is much more rare. It's very easy to, if you get this and someone's like, hey, put a fillet here, do this, refine this line, do whatever. But just having this form in space, that's its own skill set. All that is more of like the fillets and stuff. That's all like technical stuff. But finding the form in space quickly is an extremely valuable skill set, and I always encourage people to practice it, right? Don't remodel stuff that you see on the road, because you're really just copying something. Try to find something that isn't in 3D yet, maybe some sketches you find online or your own design, and try to get to this point. Try to practice that skill set, because it's extremely valuable. And also, let's remember, I've been doing this for a very long time, so it takes a very long time to sort of get to this understanding of forms, or analyzing a sketch and being able to sort of do this in a relatively short amount of time, right? Because it's really, if you do this in one day, they'll be extremely happy for you. But if you take a week, it'll be fine. But yeah, so let's get to, before we do all the resurfacing and all that, which will be the next video, we still gotta surface in the rear. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and it's gonna be pretty basic. It's gonna be very much like the front. The side was the hard part, but the back is pretty easy. So yeah, let's get to it. Alright, so first we're going to surface this little rear fender. So I'm going to grab all these curves in that surface, I'm going to isolate them, and I want you guys to pay attention on how I actually use my surfacing tool to readjust my curve network, So, and the bottom of it, the side that's not connected to the surface, to make everything a lot more smoother. So I'm basically using the top surface to figure out how that bottom surface is supposed to be, right? So right now I don't know what it's gonna be, so I'm just like in the beginning I just guess because I know it's not gonna be flat, so I'm just gonna add a little bit of curvature. And then after that, I'm gonna use my square tool, which is hotkeyed up to my number 4 in my preferences, and I'm gonna square up this side. Then using that same tool, setting it up with curvature, I'm gonna let that tell me where the surface wants to naturally go, right? So first I gotta go into my settings, and there on that number 2 side, I gotta change that to curvature, and then on my collinear options, I'm gonna turn them off because I don't need them right now. And see, this kind of shows me that the bottom of the surface is just too far out. You see how it's kind of like bending in and then it goes straight? Like it should sort of naturally go further in, right? So the first thing I'm gonna do is just make sure that all my curve network is set up with these new CVs, right? Because the curves, I just made them wherever. But now that I know that that's the right position to make that curvature, I'm just gonna snap it to that square, right? It's really kind of crazy because I'm using the curves that I used to make it are getting adjusted by the result, right? So here I got really close, but if you can see, I just gotta get that curve and snap it, right? And then get that the bottom CV and snap it. And now all I gotta do is using this information, I could kind of tell right on that bottom left corner that it's too far out. So I'm gonna get my curve network and then I'm just gonna twist it, not twist, I'm just gonna put it in further inboard. And then this will give me a nice little like surface that is nice and balanced, and there's you know, the highlights run through it really nice. You see, that's kind of how I always try to see, you know, what's important right now. You know, it's finding that curvature in the middle and then where that bottom wants to naturally go. You know, I'm sort of letting the surfaces with these types of conditions tell me what they want to do and just kind of adjusting them for that, you know. I think it's important in this part of the stage to have more emphasis on letting the surfaces do what they naturally want to do versus doing exactly what a design wants to do, right? Because a lot of times what the surface wants or what the geometry wants isn't in line with what the designer is intending. But it's a lot easier to sort of figure that out later when you already have everything blocked in and you have everything blocked in how the like geometry wants to have it blocked in, you know? Like for example, this rear surface that I just railed, you know, is a fairly simple surfacing condition. I railed it, and then now I'm gonna extend this middle curve out to give it more space. And if you notice, that surface isn't really in line with the edge of it, right? Once I extend that out, we'll see the natural intersection. And it's sort of like here's where you kind of have to make a decision. Okay, should I have that surface twist out to meet this corner, or should I just do a natural intersection? And you know, maybe it might not be exactly what the designer wants, but that's the cleanest like intersection I can get at this moment, right? And that's kind of like the balance that you have to sort of figure out on your own, right? Like where should you twist stuff, or where you should just let the surfaces do what they naturally want to do, and the natural intersections and all that, right? Because if you saw that intersection, especially if you see here with the curve network, it does change the angle, you know, and that every angle is really important in all the designs and all that. So it's really important to sort of try to figure out if you're kind of doing surfacing first and then design, or if you're trying to get the design first, right? And obviously in my own workflow, I always try to get the cleanest possible surface. And then after that, if they're like, okay, that, you know, I want that to be out here, let's twist it. And it's like, okay, we could do all the twisting later. But as I'm still trying to block in this form, I'm just gonna let the surfaces sort of dictate their natural intersections and their curvature on what they want to do, where they want to land, you know. And I hope this, I know this is a bit, I don't know, it's almost philosophical, you know, but I hope if you could, I hope I'm explaining myself correctly on what is going on in the back of my mind. So here I'm just gonna start blocking in the rear window. So if you see in the top left sketch, you can see that that window is sort of like cut in from the roof, and I'm just, you know, doing the typical inserting the curve on surface to cut it where I want, and then here I'm adding a curve and figuring out the distance, and then I'm gonna rail that across. And now that I see it, I'm kind of like, okay, I'm gonna make sure it's parallel. And it's also, it's obviously, it has too much curvature in the bottom, right? So I'm gonna add a curve there, project it, and then trim convert it to straighten out that bottom edge. And then now that I see it with that window, I could kind of see that it's a little too big. You know, especially when you see the sketch. The sketch is really like it's a little tiny window in the rear, right? And then from here, I could start adding little curve networks to kind of see where it's at. And right here, I realized that I should have cut it just a little further back to make my life a lot easier, right? So now I got to do everything kind of over again. Whenever you see places where, you know, moving things, you know, 10 millimeters can kind of make your surface just a lot more connected, it's really, to me, it's kind of worth it, you know, just to rebuild it. And then, you know, that way that corner is completely connected to that other corner, right? And here I'm going to do the same thing, except that now that I have that angle, I'm going to surface it backwards, right? And then I'm going to extend it back to the middle, and then I'm going to use my symmetry plane align to get that there. And then I'm going to rail this and extend it a little bit back, and then I'm going to project this curve, and then there we got a little like, I guess I think these are called louvers. I'm not sure. And now to fill in this sort of like deck, I just add a curve. I go to the side view, add a little more degrees, and then add more curvature, and then just surface out that square. And as you see here, my number one, the position failed. That's because it's a trimmed surface, right? It needs a little more data to get a perfect positional like connection, but it doesn't really matter too much when you know, when it's in this blocky form. You know, we don't need to look for perfection just yet. And then in this corner, the bottom corner of the fender, I'm just gonna surface this up just like a regular little square. And all those curves are still straight, completely straight. And so let's remember, no curve will ever be like completely straight. It kind of, anytime you use a completely straight curve in the final form, it really, you know, it doesn't really work out. So I'm just adding a little bit of curvature, and that makes everything look a lot better. And here, I'm gonna use a very similar technique to, you know, the front headlights, right? I'm using the tubular offset tool to make the edges. And as you remember last time I did the same, I'm moving these edges closer in so it doesn't mess with any of the sides, right? And then I could just trim it. And then now I have a little sort of border around this rear. Here I'm just trying to figure out what can be my next move, right? What can I build off of this in terms of the internal structure, right? And I'm kind of like looking, and then I see that bottom curve, and I'm like, oh, okay, at least I know that that bottom curve is definitely going to go in like that, and we can, I could use that to sort of go all around the form, right? So I'm going to realign it to my new like border, and then I'm going to use my rail tool to get it in place. And now, remember, I forgot before, I forgot how I used to clean them post, you know, here changing the degrees and stuff. But I'm trying not a new method, but I'm trying to use my rail tool and as the final tool, you know, instead of like rebuilding it. And so here you'll see it again, and then, you know, all those spans, and I go, okay, so then I go explicit control, and then I give it like a 3x3 sort of degree, saying I keep everything as clean as possible. Let's remember always, all my surfaces will try to clean. The minimum amount of degrees you need is the right degrees, right? Like the minimum amount of spans is better, right? See all these spans? Let's get them out of there. See? And then I'm just kind of like doing the same thing, just getting a little border around it. So after this, I'm just looking for some quick little easy wins, and I'm like, oh, okay, you know, I could just kind of quickly surface in the bottom of these volumes, right? Just get those curves, rail them, and then make sure it's parallel. I always change it to parallel. I might as well make it my default, you know. Make sure there's curvature in the middle, extend it out, and then use those two as a way to connect them, and then just square it up. You know, add a little more degrees, add a little more volume, and then use my square tool to get that corner. When you compare this rear to the body side, you know, the rear and the front, they're just really easy. If you just keep it very blocky like this, it's pretty chill. And then here I'm kind of analyzing that, and I'm kind of, you know, the surfaces, they're coming to a point. So I'm like, I'm not really happy with that. So I'm actually going to rebuild it again. So I'm going to add a little sort of like border here. And then this way I have a little more meat right there. And now I have to sort of like readjust everything. It's funny because I'm modeling the same like sort of rear, and both times I'm using a completely different method of like, you know, kind of going from different sides And then now, since I already have that surface, I'm gonna intersect it and trim convert it, as opposed to like making it like a square like I did last time, right? And then this way I can kind of, and just remember, I always keep everything really loose in the sense of like how I model, like it's not like, if you ever see how I model something, that's not really like my only method of modeling something, right? It's only the one that kind of came to my head. If you notice with that rear, I basically remodeled it about 3 different times in this video, which is always important. Like I always put a bigger emphasis on trying to minimize the speed of your steps, so that everything you do is really quickly, and then this way you can kind of do a very like free form, kind of how I'm doing it. I don't really think much. I'm just kind of, or I guess I don't think about where the tool is at. I just sort of like press the button and kind of to test different modeling methods. And here I'm just kind of doing the rear tail light very much like how I did the front tail light using my tubular offset tool. Let me post up the picture of the rear sketch so you can see what I'm sort of trying to do with the rear. And actually this is a good time to sort of notice what I've done and what I'm trying to do, and also how I just simplify everything. I'm not trying to solve all the design right now. I'm just trying to get the most basic shape based off this design. But the thing is, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I see a lot of people when in the beginning, it's really hard. They try so hard to like find the final design off the get-go. Just try to remember, block everything in as simple as possible, especially if you're not used to it. This is a very advanced, sort of lesson or video series. But if start slower with like a mouse or something, but just remember that it just takes time to understand how to break down a design to its core foundation and build that. And then off that foundation, we're gonna add the more intricacies, all the different design elements. But there's no way you're gonna be able to do that right off the get-go. There's like, I wouldn't be able to do that if I didn't go through this phase. I wouldn't be able to find the next phase. So I'm just trying to, I guess, emphasize the fact that just when you analyze a design and everything, just don't go with all the fancy stuff. Just make it as primitive as possible, and then once you have a full complete picture, then you could start adding the more intricate design elements or surfacing elements. After this, all I do is, in terms for the tail light, is I just reproportion it because obviously it's a little too thick. So I'm just gonna but let me just fast forward it because all I'm really doing is changing the tubular offsets and then retrimming it. But the next one is gonna be on how I made the wing. With the wing, I kept it very simple because I definitely know that rear, especially proportionally speaking, the wing was really gonna be changed a lot, or that I just wasn't gonna hit it in the first like attempt. So I'm doing the most basic sort of like surfacing with it. Nothing too fancy, nothing too crazy. It's just it's honestly it's almost like just a couple planes. I mean, there's really not much to it. And then from that, I'm gonna do an offset of it, or actually no, I control copy and paste and push it down, and then from there I skin the other side, and then I use my rail tool to sort of push that surface down, and then I don't know. Oh, then I rail the other side, and that kind of doesn't give me a good that doesn't give me a good rail. So instead I grab that, I copy it, and then I move it in, and then I move it back, and this to me is even looser like modeling. I'm kind of just grabbing surfaces, copying them, extending them, and nothing too serious because it's still just a blocked in form. When I started doing more design modeling as opposed to like technical class A modeling, it was very hard for me to do this sort of thing, like very loose modeling where I kind of just grab something, copy it, paste, intersect it, extend it, do all this stuff without really caring much about anything else, because because that's kind of like that's a very valuable skill set to have as a 3D modeler. You know, just being able to quickly set something up and not be hypercritical on the surface quality or anything, because sometimes it's just the timing just isn't right. You know, like I've had most of the time actually the projects, you know, instead of having a more relaxed timeline where I have time to, you know, surface everything and do everything very perfect. Most of the time is just like under a very harsh deadline, and you know, you just gotta get it done. So you don't really have the luxury to like make everything super perfect. So a big part of just, you know, learning to model is learning to model quickly and kind of, you know, shitty, but still with the right, you know, structure. From here, I move on to the lower rear fender, and all I'm going to do is add a curve here, and then I'm going to rail it, and this gives me the natural intersection, and then I'm going to add a little more degrees and add a little more curvature to the curve, and then this way I can see what the natural intersection is between those, and then just intersect them and then trim them. And to add thickness, I just put a curve and then I rail it, and then using that same surface, I just extend it back to change that angle, and then I rail the next one again. You know, this is this I've done like a million times in like most of my videos. I always add thickness like this. Now we're gonna get to the most important part, surfacing this little itty bitty light on the top. You know, a lot of people think that it's, you know, I don't know, it's like little, small, and kind of is insignificant. But I actually think that in designs, especially little details like this, you really need it right from the beginning, because it could be a very, even though it's a tiny thing, it really gives a certain character to a car. So it's really important to, you know, find those little design elements and surfacing them, you know, just taking the time, even though they're simple and small and you could do them like towards the end of the project. It's always nice to kind of have that, and you could sort of start imagining it, you know, in this car, right? It really helps like kind of get the proportions right. You know, I don't know, to me it just seems it's a, even though it's so tiny, it really does change a lot the look of it, you know. It goes to show how talented Hanbin is. Once I get back to on the rear, I notice that that angle is a little bit too flat, so I'm just gonna delete it, and then use my rail tool again to sort of start all over. And I'm gonna make sure that I go into my explicit control and take away that span. So just make it 3 and 3 degrees. And then here I'm gonna extend it out so it can meet the surface, right? And I'm kind of doing, I think this is probably a very similar method to what I did last time. And then I intersect that, extend that surface out first, and then extend the trim on surface, and then do a trim convert to give me that surface. And then here with this one, since it's already trimmed out, I decided just to trim it without doing like the typical trim convert. And then I'm going to use my extend tool to move that angle out. So now I have a much more aggressive, like, you know, upwards angle towards the edges, right? From here, I go down to the lower rear fascia, and as I'm looking at the curves, I notice that it's a little bit too complex. I could sort of simplify it for right now. And so I just grab that CV and eliminate those two curves, and then just connect it. That way I can keep it a little simpler, a little easier to figure out, right? Remember to try to use the same like edges and curves from your model, right? So what I'm going to do is duplicate this edge, and then I'm going to snap it to that new position, and then I'll extend it back. So this way that curve is completely matched up in terms of curvature with the top, right? And now I could focus on just how far forward I'm going to move it, and you know what the relationships are, you know, just kind of moving everything around. As you develop these curve networks, and then as you develop the surfacing with it, you're gonna notice that you know, you start to understand the proportions more, and you know, obviously you move like back and forth a little bit, you know. So here I'm just kind of like trying to figure out what would be the right proportion to use here, and I just copy and paste that curve, and then I skin it, and that gives me a nice little thickness. And then I extend that out, and then I use my rail tool to connect it, extend that back, connect that, And then this is really important. Look how I changed the angle to make sure that it intersects with the edge, right? So if I see that, if I keep moving forward, it intersects it. So I'm trying to find the right, like correct angle, right? And that's sort of it right there. But even though that angle is good, it's still a little too thick. So I'm just gonna move all of these back and just make them a little thinner. But now I know that all those angles are talking to each other, and if I add fillets on them and all that, it'll be really good. Now I can start adding thickness to this lower fascia, so I just add a curve there, and from the side view, I just, find the right thickness, I think. And then I'm gonna again go explicit control and change it to parallel, not natural. Then I'm extend it out, and then I'm gonna rail it. Honestly, it's a bit, this is like the same thing I did with all the little things, except it's a bigger, portion of the design, right? Like making these clean rails and extending them back and railing them again. And then here I'm like, even though the angle is right, I still want it to be actually touching. So I'm just gonna use my align tool and make it positional. And then this way it's completely connected. And then now I could use that surface to make the edge of this, right? Kind of very similar to what we did in the front. Now I move on to the lower aspect of this little like rear diffuser. And here I have to figure out if I should add the wings and all that. But the thing is, there's gonna be such big proportional changes that even though I would like to add the grills already, it seems a little bit of a waste of time because I do know that from the rear it's still very like I'm pretty sure Hanbin is gonna change it a lot. So instead of adding all the little like fins and elements that you see in the sketch, I decided just to, do a simple little like wing in the bottom. Here, for some reason, I wanted to extract the tail light curve in the middle. So here I duplicate that curve and then I trim it again and then I extend it back so I could have the exact curve that's based off that surface. And even though I don't think I use it, I guess I just kind of assumed I would later, and that's why I sort of built it. Now I'm just filling in the inside of this tail light. So I'm adding some curves using my rails, and then extending it back to try to get the right edge, right? And here I'm trying to snap it, but it doesn't make sense. So I use my detach tool to sort of like get kind of around where it's intersecting. And then I detach it there, delete the other aspect of it, and then that's where I realize, oh, I have to rail it from here to there, right? So I have to extend it back to clear that back surface, and then I have to rail it, right? So I extend it and then I rail it, and then I go to my explicit control and I change I really have to change that now that actually, I recommend, I know I've said this before, record your workflow. It really makes you see where you kind of, you're kind of doing extra steps. I know there's definitely a lot of other areas I can improve on, and recording it definitely helps. So here I'm just kind of trying to extend it and find the right form, but it keeps getting twisted, so I have to use the planarized hole tool to like sort of clean it up. So now to build the lower part of this tail light, I'm gonna get that curve that I used for the top, and then I'm gonna lower it to the bottom, and then I'm gonna extend it back so that it's only on the tail light, and then I'm gonna isolate it, and then using my skin tool, I'm gonna just click on every corner, and then I'm gonna make sure that one side is on default, and then the ends I'm gonna make it so that the side is connect ends. And then now this gives me a quick way to, surface this little tail light. Even though I'm not a fan of the twisting and all that, I'm still, just keeping everything very loose. Now I extend this bottom surface back so I could try to figure out how to close it. And it actually takes me some time to sort of like scratch my head and figure out, okay, how can I like close this little opening up, because I kind of did everything a little quicker than usual. And so it kind of like nipped me in the butt a little bit in this situation. But I do know that if I just slowly start closing it up, then I could figure it out, right? And every time you add another surface to, it kind of helps you find the next step, right? It's always a bit difficult to figure that out. And then here I'm just doing some quick rails just to kind of see how they relate to that bottom surface, right? And then I'm like, okay, well, they're not really even intersecting. So what happens if I lower the degree and then I grab that edge and then I push it forward, right? Just to see if I could intersect it. And I'm like, okay, what if I connect it to the edge, like right there, you know? It's all really just me trying to figure it out, you know? Then from far away, I kind of noticed it looks a little weird. So I'm like, okay, never mind, that didn't work. So I just extend it back. And then I'm like, well, maybe if we add a shelf there, maybe that's going to be the right call, right? So I add a curve, extend these out, and then connect them to add a little bit of an angle. And then I just rail it, and then I rail the top of it. And now we're getting a little closer to getting a full, complete like form, right? Because now we could kind of see what's going on. It's really, once you start blocking everything in and everything starts closing up, it starts to kind of make a lot more sense, you know, like you can see where you could kind of move stuff around to make it look more correct, you know, or even just leave it like that, you know, because now if you see here, it's basically done, you know, like I feel like here we're getting a lot closer to the final form, right? Like all that really like is left is maybe closing up some of like the bottom, right? Like just surfacing in those in. And here I just realized that I kind of messed up those angles. So I'm going to extend those out, right, to kind of hit that corner. Remember I talked about making surfaces sort of like talk to each other wherever you can, you know. So here I was like, all right, I just extend it out. And then here I intersect, trim convert, and then there now that bottom is a little more, you know, closed up. So after this, all I do is just surface that rear by railing some curves, just to block out, just to add some blackout surface there, and then that to me would be considered like the end of the first stage, you know. After this, I'll show you guys how to add that glowing shader. But I feel like right now I could just take the time to thank you guys for watching this. Thank you for, you know, hitting the like button and, you know, all those nice comments. And yeah, so I hope this series has been helpful. You know, we still got a long ways to go. So first we got to go into our hardware shade. Then there, make sure that your shader glow is selected. And then we're going to go into our material editor and go remember it's the apply shader to start the tool. And then go into our right mouse button, click on open shader editor, and then click on whatever you want to make it glow. And if you see there's a glow menu, it's right under ambient occlusion. And then when you turn that on, it makes everything really nice and glowy. So you know, that's a very cool and easy way to make your, you know, file stand out a bit, you know, when you're sort of reviewing it with the boss. And after I add a little more glow to the rest of the materials, this kind of concludes this video. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. And oh, and the paint is, I think it's one of the black metallic paints that are already in our shader library. So I felt like I kind of wanted to take change it up a little bit, you know, just because we've been looking at this shader all this time. So it's the third dark metallic shader. And then I just, you know, apply it, and then that's the car you guys were seeing in the beginning, nice and done. All right, so I'll see you guys in a couple weeks when I resurface all the with the new design elements. Take care, bye bye.